There's the big news to go over today. The Toronto Maple Leafs have made multiple new signings, and following what has been a very interesting offseason for Brad Living thus far, he continues to make moves. We're going to break down exactly what those are, as well as discuss a big update surrounding Calle Jarnkrok and his future in Toronto. Stay tuned for all that in this episode, but before we get into it, if you're part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. About 71% of you are watching right now aren't subscribed, so make sure to hit the subscribe button. You guys are an absolute beast of the support. Folks, a lot to go over today, and obviously there is a lot of news coming out as of late surrounding the Leafs, and of course, we're waiting for Brad Living to make the big splash regarding a top six forward. But in the meantime, they've made some signings that have pretty interesting implications going forward, and let's dive right into it right now. They've made three signings. This is the Toronto Marlies. We've re-signed signed forwards Brandon Baddock, Luke Granger, and Alex Nylander. And of course, these are Marlies signings, but like we've seen in the past, even last year, year before, a lot of these guys end up playing at the NHL level, depending on injuries, depending on depth. And these ultimately, may not seem like a lot right now. They usually have an impact somewhere down the line for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So it's pretty important here. But also the biggest one is, of course, Alex Nylander. They've decided to re-sign him, which means he didn't leave somewhere else for an NHL caliber deal, which is something that we thought last year was going to happen. And of course, for Alex Nylander, he was one of the players that we assumed was going to get some good run last year. Ultimately, it didn't happen. He didn't play great in his brief time with the Leafs last year when he did play, but it is a 1-year deal, and he re-signs with the Marlies, and of course, staying with his brother and all those things. But we'll dive into each of the players, Alex Nylander being the most notable. Very interesting, and again, we're going to probably see some of these guys at some point this season because, of course, health is always not necessarily a concern with the Toronto Maple Leafs, but always ends up being a factor in every NHL season.
Yeah, we were in this exact same spot last season, or last offseason, I should say, when we were like, hey, these are Marley signings. Are they going to play a factor? Well, Alex Nylander ended up playing NHL games. He got his contract updated or upgraded, I should say, to a two-way contract and ended up playing in the NHL. So I feel like this, could be the same situation heading into next year, right? Brandon Baddock is also an interesting one to me. I was like, why does that name sound familiar? He played with the Toronto Marlies last year, so they re-signed him as well. So couple, depth signings. They needed to shore up the Marlies as well. They lost a couple of young guys, like Alex Steves is gone now. We covered that on the channel, so they needed to re-sign a couple guys. Baddock to me is, again, just an AHL guy. He's 30 years old already. There's some interesting names here for sure. Alex Nylander to me is a very interesting one. A lot of people are going to scoff at this. I think that he can get an NHL contract somewhere, but he's deciding to stay with William in the same city and playing for the Toronto Marlies. Obviously spent some time in the NHL last year, and a lot of people forget because his time in the NHL, which, again, small sample size last year, wasn't great, right? Didn't put up any points, anything like that. But he actually had a really, really good year with the Toronto Marlies. I mean, second in points behind only Alex Steves, and Alex Steves had a great season. Of course, didn't work out in the organization. He's gone to Boston now, but he had a great year in the AHL. So I have no doubt that he's going to do the same thing next year. And again, it's just a depth signing that, if, like we usually see in November, the Leafs, for some reason, everyone gets injured, we might see Alex Nylander at the NHL level again. He was a serviceable player, and it was a cool story. So nice to see him back, re-signed with the Toronto Marlies, I guess. But I think there is a real chance we do see him again in the NHL this year.
Yeah, and obviously the contract right now, he doesn't have a direct path to the NHL. We know last year, you can see it from Nick Burden, Nylander turned his last AHL contract into an NHL deal in November. And you can see here, he ended up playing 5 games with the Toronto Maple Leafs and didn't register a point, spending most of his time in the team's bottom 6. But like you mentioned, he finished second on the Marlies in points behind Alex Steves, who's probably going to get a decent NHL shot at some point here soon. And ultimately, it's going to be interesting because at the end of the day, Alex Nylander, he did not put a very good first impression for the big league team, I guess, the Maple Leafs last year, but in the Marlies, continued to develop, and he ultimately earned himself another contract. But the big thing here would be the Leafs do have more depth this year, at least as it stands right now. We'll dive into Jarnkrok and things like that, so it might be more difficult for him to get up in, especially with the signings of guys like Michael Pezzetta. But at the end of the day, very interesting names. Let's dive into a couple of the other names. And you mentioned Brandon Baddock. He's less of an exciting player. He is 30 years old, like a depth winger again. We probably don't see him, especially because his numbers with the Marlies are very poor, at least offensively. He's more of an enforcer type. You can see his penalty minutes there as well. Last year with the Marlies, 7 games before coming over from Rockford. So very interesting on that note. Luke Granger, he's a younger player. This one could be interesting. This would obviously be his first year with the Toronto Marlies, coming off the season with the Wichita Thunder in the ECHL, putting up 21 points. Again, probably not going to impact the Maple Leafs team, but these are players that you sign and then hopefully going forward. But Granger is probably the most interesting one outside of Alex Nylander in this group.
Definitely, I think he is the most interesting one. He's younger. Baddock, again, like you said, is 30 years old, right? Like more of an enforcer type. He's just going to fill out the lineup, stuff like that. But this one is very interesting. He's still a relatively young player, very small sample size in the AHL. He went to the ECHL last year. I do wonder if the Leafs are going to be like, hey, listen, come into camp, see what you can do, see if you make the AHL team, and then work with our coaching staff to continue to develop your game, because he is still relatively young. I don't think he's going to make like a big impact at the NHL level or anything like that, but you never know, right? There's a lot of journeymen in these leagues. So, he's still relatively young. So I'm excited to see what he's going to be able to do and make the most of with this opportunity. So out of the three, like, what you're getting with Alex Nylander, this one is intriguing to me because it's like, what can he be? Will he rise to the occasion in, the AHL training camp? Does he make the AHL squad? And then from there, does he continue his development?
Yeah, and last year, again, Wichita Thunder, a year before, or a little bit as well with the San Jose Barracuda. But let us know down below what your thoughts are on that. And speaking of depth pieces, a new report has dropped from Anthony DeMarco talking about Calle Yarncroke and David Kampf. He revealed that they are the top candidates on paper to be cleared out, but there hasn't been much talk recently to move either player. So this is an interesting turn here because obviously we had a video and we've had videos this past week on it. They're going to have to move off of one or not, or both of them. And of course, now that they, some transactions have started to, slow down a little bit, I think the floodgates are hopefully going to start opening here soon as the regular season inches closer and closer, because you look at the depth chart, especially David Kampf, he doesn't really have a spot on this team. They now, since they re-signed Nick Robertson, I think that might open up the floodgates for guys like Calle Yarncroke and David Kampf. But as it stands, you have Kampf and Nick Robertson making, almost $4 million a year, whatever the exact number is, might be more than that, combined for nothing really, because they're not going to be playing every single day. Now you can obviously argue one or the other to have as like an extra piece. Obviously that's good, but having both of those guys in the bench, that's a lot of a salary, especially for a team that's looking to improve the top six and a team that in particular still needs, I think, one more player to put them over the top. So hopefully this opens up the floodgates. But the new report is they haven't necessarily had any talks recently, or have been, talking with other teams recently about it. And I think that's going to change now that things start to open up a little bit. And a bunch of new reports are starting to drop this week as well surrounding movement. So I think we're going to get some big movement here soon. But ultimately, something like that needs to happen beyond just, of course, some AHL signings.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily surprised by that report that there isn't, too much going on behind the scenes or no real rumblings, because I think things needed to settle down around the league with the arbitration cases. Again, I've been saying it the last couple of videos, like some GMs needed to know where they're at in terms of their salary cap before they go out and make some trades and make some moves, which I think will pick up here in August, because it's been abnormally quiet the last month. So I feel like things are going to start picking up the next couple of weeks, or maybe even closer to training camp, but things are going to start picking up. And when you look at the roster, first of all, you can see here, again, the lines, I don't know if they're going to look like this, right? I don't think so. I think Dakota Joshua is probably a third liner. What happens with Bobby McMahon? Not entirely sure. What happens with Nick Robertson? Yes, they settled, but they can still trade him, right? So to me, it's what's happening with Robertson. Calle Yarncroke, is somebody interested in him? I would imagine a team would be interested in him. And same with David Kampf. David Kampf does not have a spot on this team. I could see them still hanging on to Calle Yarncroke, although it doesn't make much sense to me. I think they need to free up as much salary cap space as possible, and I wouldn't have Calle Yarncroke in my plans, but I could see them hanging on to him. But David Kampf does not have a spot on this team anymore, so they have to look at moving off of, I think, 3 players at this point, and then in turn turning that into a top 6 player. And we're going to have another video on this. I'm looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins. I know you don't want to deal with a former GM. We know the whole thing with Calgary too, with Brad Living, Kyle Dubas obviously being the GM there in Pittsburgh. I'm looking at Pittsburgh because they're the only sellers right now. They have what you need, and I think they're looking for what you have as well. So could make a lot of sense.
Yeah, let us know what your thoughts are on that. And of course, what move, and out of those 2 players, who you want to see let go. Also, let us know your thoughts are on the signings. See you guys later.